Okay, great to have everybody here today for our monthly session. So, just a couple things on the monthly sessions. We're doing this the first Sunday of every month, as you guys know. First Sunday of every month. So, in terms of figuring out when it is and so forth, that's all you really got to remember. First Sunday of every month, same time, 10 o'clock Pacific time. As you guys know, most of the time I'm on the West Coast. I live in Los Angeles, California. Um, the background today's class is different because I am not at home. I am at a friend's place in South Carolina, but normally I am in Los Angeles. So I'll just give you the 10 o'clock in the morning Pacific time is the normal time for this session. Um, we go about an hour. We may go an hour and a half, depends on the discussion, questions, and so forth, and depends on how much I have prepared for the topic. Um, Today we're going to talk about love. Um, in a future session, I'm going to talk about transcending cruelty, and I'm going to talk about free will. Those are a couple more topics that I'm going to talk about. But feel free to email me, text me, go on my website. If you don't have my email address, go on my website, kelvinchin.org. Just go on the contact page, send me an email there if you have any topics that you really want me to talk about in any of these monthly sessions. Now, the other thing that I want to mention to you is I'm going to start changing this up a little bit so that you guys have a little bit more notice, advance notice, in terms of what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to start, there'll still be the first Sunday of every month, scheduling wise, same time and all that. But I'm going to come up with 5 or 6 topics that I may rotate through, depending if you guys have, shoot me some interesting topics. I'll add that to the rotation kind of a thing. And that way it'll give you guys some advance notice, as I said, in terms of what I'm going to be talking about. Oh, he's going to talk about that topic in August. Oh, he's going to talk about that topic in September, whatever, so that you can kind of plan ahead a little bit and schedule it on your calendars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Um, so that will be coming in a future email soon. So let's get into the discussion today. People talk about love so much, don't they? You hear the phrase, "Oh, I love you," "What's love?" All of that. We're going to get into what is it really, and uh, what are the different nuances and you kind of gradations and degrees and colorations and qualities of love in different scenarios and so forth. Again, I'm just going to talk about some examples and so forth, and we'll open it up to Q&A at the end of our my talk at the beginning here. At the end, we'll open up the Q&A for you guys to discuss your thoughts about this. But let me just seed, SEED, plant seeds in your minds first to kind of get you thinking about this in maybe a little bit of a different way. Also, as you know, you see the title of my book there, my purple book, Marcus Aurelius Updated. It's available on all the online booksellers. Um, but a lot of what I'm talking about in many of these topics that we're discussing in this Living More Happily um, monthly series are topics that I talk about in some of the 67 essays in that book. So if you check this slide out, you'll see that I went in actually into my digital version of my book, and I did a quick search. How many times love is mentioned in those 67 essays in my book, Marcus Aurelius Updated. Over 150 mentions. I think it was 151, 152 mentions of love in various essays and so forth. So it's a topic that I get into and I reference. Obviously, that was a bigger number than I anticipated, to be honest. I thought, maybe a couple of dozen times or whatever. It's a lot more than a couple of dozen times that I, the author, would have guesstimated. So find that interesting, right? So those of you who have read this book, right? So this is my Marcus Aurelius updated book, right? This book right here. This book is my third book. It's called After the Afterlife. And if you've read this book, I talk about my experiences after the afterlife, and also in particular, specifically about my memories, my past lives, and some of my memories in between lives. But on page 51 in this book, I'll read to you a section. If you have the book lying around, you may just flip to it. On page 51, the heading is Jesus Visitation, Round Rock, Texas. So in May 2017, while I was taking a shower at my ex-girlfriend's mother's house in Round Rock, Round Rock is a city, is a town in Texas, Jesus came to me another time. He again spoke to me about the concept of love, but this time he elaborated on it, saying that love can take on many different forms and expressions, that while it is a common underpinning, right? It has it meaning love, has a common underpinning as he defined it to us 2,000 years ago, and which he reminded me of in my apartment 3 years earlier. Remember what he said? Just a quick aside for those of you who don't know the story. 3 years earlier or so, in my apartment in Austin, Texas, where I was living, he reminded me about love being accepting the other person for who they are, not who you wish they were. All right. But what I'm saying here in this section of the book is that in addition to that, he was saying to me in 2017 during this visitation, he said, love has many nuances to it that need to be explained and illustrated to people. That's the quote of what he said to me. He asked me to give talks and lead discussions about that, because he said while he had intended to share his ideas on the subject as one of the several projects on his plate 2,000 years ago, he was only here for those 3 to 4 years before his unanticipated death. So he did not have time to get to it. He also said to me, plus you have a lot more experience than I ever had with relationships, so you can speak sharing examples with people that they will understand. So again, that's from this book, After the Afterlife. So let's get into it. What is love? So typical definitions of love. How do most people think of love? Look at the list there. Doesn't it, that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, you've probably heard people talk about love in those various ways, right? Liking somebody really, really, really a lot. Like, I really like you. Or just, feeling the romantic kind of love. There's the more abstract feeling or description of love. There's the liking, there's the romantic, there's this thrills and chills people describe. That's kind of more romantic, or the butterflies in your stomach. That's kind of the various ways people describe this romantic feeling. And there's also this more abstract feeling about love, isn't there? That is kind of more like a connection with everybody and beings and so forth. But this was the definition that Jesus talked about with us 2,000 years ago, accepting the other person for who they are, not who you wish they were. In other words, not who you want them to be, not the ideal image of the other person that you've conjured up in your mind, and you're trying to push them and mold them and squeeze them into that mold of what you want them to be. He would say, that's not love. That's not accepting the other person, how they're coming to you, in the way they are coming to you at that moment, in that present moment. Right? So there's two major concepts. If you think about it, the way he was defining love 2,000 years ago, acceptance and free will. So obviously the acceptance, I think, is pretty obvious. Yes, you're accepting, you're taking that person, welcoming that person in the way that they're presenting themselves to you at that moment without trying to change them. That's acceptance. Free will means what? Free will just means allowing somebody or anybody, yourself or other people, to make your own decisions, to make their own decisions. And so how that person is presenting themselves to you, I'm saying in a very broad sense, maybe subconsciously, not always consciously, in other words, is a choice that they're making. And I'm using choice in terms of free will or decision in a very, very, like I said, in a very broad sense, because maybe subconscious and maybe they have an emotional pattern that they're unconscious, they're not even consciously aware of that exists within them, and then therefore their behavior manifests in whatever way it does based on that emotional pattern that they've been carrying around for many, many thousands of lifetimes, perhaps. Even that, I'm saying, is a choice that the person's making, but not their 8-inch bucket part of their mind necessarily, that consciousness, part of their mind that they're aware of everything that they're doing. Because not everybody is aware of everything that they're doing. But that deep part within themselves is still themselves. So those of you who've heard my other talks, you know how I view our mind. Our mind is not just the 8-inch bucket part of our mind. Our mind is much broader than that. And I think we have to own the fact that we are all of that. And we are all of that as individuals. And everybody's larger sense of self is not the same as other people's larger sense of self. So that's a conflation that you hear a lot of spiritual teachers say. Yeah, we're all the same. No, we're not all the same. That's like saying the ocean is this, that every water molecule in the ocean is the same. No, they may be all water molecules, but they're not the same in the sense that they are still distinct and individual separate water molecules that make up the ocean. So in the same way, our minds have free will, and each mind has free will ability to make whatever choices that it makes. And so accepting, back to the concept of love here, accepting the other person in the way that they're presenting also means implicitly that we need to accept their decision making, even if it's not what we would want them to choose to do or how to be. Okay? So let's talk about this, break this down a little bit. So really, we're talking about an appreciation of the many parts of the other person, right? And that means accepting the good, bad, and the ugly. I say less than perfect parts. And why did I say less than perfect? Because so many people, as I said, have this ideal image of who they want other people to be. And when the other people are not that ideal image, they get unhappy. Well, what's this whole monthly series about? Or are living more happily. So let's get over right away about this perfection and ideal image stuff. I mean, you could have an ideal image. I'm not saying don't have an ideal image. I'm saying don't base your happiness on it. Don't base your happiness on whether another person meets that ideal image or not. That's where the rubber meets the road. Have ideals. Ideals and concepts are what I teach, right? So I'm a big believer in having ideals and concepts that are healthy. I'm trying to use as neutral language, as non-judgy language as possible, that are healthy. Yeah, that are good for us, that are healthy for us. When I say good, I mean healthy for us. But that doesn't mean that we judge everybody against that and then demean them if they don't rise to that level, right? So accepting the good and the less perfect parts of whoever they are, right? And without trying to change them. That's the free will part, right? Not trying to change them. That's because that's who they are. Accepting their free will, conscious or unconscious decision making. Because you see, unconscious decision making, where does that come from? It comes from a lot of conscious decision making that then becomes unconscious. Isn't that what a habit is? Think about it. You keep doing something over and over and over again, and you're consciously doing whatever you're doing over and over and over again. Eventually, it becomes so familiar to you, it becomes a habit, and then you're not consciously going through the motions anymore. You're just going through the motions unconsciously. It becomes a habit, becomes a pattern, and our emotions are the same, I would argue. Even the ones that you may say, well, I didn't know that. Da, 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 da. Well, at some point, I would argue that way back in the past, you did, and you forgot. And so we need to own that, is my point. I'm not here to blame ourselves, but we need to take ownership and responsibility for our choices and our actions. So what about judging and rejecting bad behavior? Can we still love them? Can we still love them and leave them? Yeah, the short answer is yes. Right? And sometimes people will say, well, judging, I shouldn't be judging other. Yes, you should be judging other people's behavior. You don't judge their souls. You cannot judge a person's soul inside. That's between them and themselves. I agree with that, not judging a person's soul, but their behavior. If you don't judge somebody's behavior as being bad, you will subject yourself to being abused over and over and over again for thousands of lifetimes, right? And you may know some people, have observed some people who've been doing that. Maybe you don't know for thousands of lifetimes, but you see them doing that in this lifetime. They continue to think that they should not be judging other people because they think that that's being spiritual. That's being stupid. All right, I'll be direct with you. That's being dumb. It's being blind. No, we judge people's bad behavior. All right. And you can still love them and leave them. Your loving is you're not trying to change them. That's how you are loving them. So again, shifting in a little bit of nuance here, very important nuance. Because if you don't understand and get this and get your mind and your heart and your energy, your spirit around what I'm talking about right now, you will continue to attract abusive people into your life over and over and over again for thousands of lifetimes. And I've seen people do it. I know somebody who's done that. I know somebody in this lifetime who's done that. And it's partially based on this person's inability to draw distinctions and this person's inability to think about love in a nuanced way. This is the nuanced way I'm suggesting that you could insert in there that takes care of that problem. That second bullet point, the one on the bottom of that slide. You're loving the other person is you're not trying to change them into somebody else. That's how you are accepting, and therefore in Jesus's definition, that is implied in his definition. Okay? It does not always mean staying. If it is not in our healthy self-interest, if it's hurtful to us emotionally, physically, or energetically, get out of the relationship. Get out of there. ASAP, as soon as possible. All right? And children, people will use children as an example sometimes. Well, I stayed for the children. Really? What kind of example are you demonstrating to your children to stay in an abusive relationship? You're teaching your children that abuse is okay. You're teaching your children, depending on how they're wired internally in their own personality traits, you might be teaching them to be abusive themselves or to be abused either way, depending on where their personality kind of, falls in that spectrum. It's not good parenting. So it's not good for yourself, and it's not good for your children to stay in such a relationship either. Now, if you did, and some of you may have already, don't beat yourself up about what you did, but learn from the experience. Learn from these ideas that I'm sharing, hopefully, and learn from your own personal experience if you have been in an abusive relationship and stayed in it for the children or whatever reason, for the money, for the this, for the that. Seek counseling from somebody who's good, who's good meaning what? A good counselor, a good therapist who's helped people get out of abusive relationships. That's what I mean by good. Not somebody who's just a listener who just sits there and listens and listens and listens and listens to you complain and doesn't give you any ways of approach and thinking about the situation to get you out of it. That's not a good therapist. All right? And get good legal counsel. So love is accepting who you are, not who I wish you were. And remember, this applies to ourselves too. Self-love, the notion of loving ourselves. It means accepting the stuff that we don't like about ourselves too. All right? That's tough for some people. I get it. Nobody is perfect. You got to keep reminding yourselves of that. All these religious institutions and spiritual teachers out there, some of whom have tens of millions of followers, they preach this incorrect notion of perfection, of enlightenment, of perfection in the angels or the gods or whoever. No being is perfect. Accept imperfection. Seek growth. Seek greater health. But we need to accept that nobody, including ourselves, is perfect. This notion of perfection is the basic ingredient of suffering in the world. It's incorrect. So these are just a couple reminders here. So love is what? Embracing, another way of saying accepting, embracing and not ignoring. So it's another way of saying this, accepting our warts ideas too, right? Accepting the idea of accepting our warts, the stuff we don't like about ourselves, not ignoring, embracing, not ignoring. And in a relationship, isn't that what love, how that's expressed in a romantic, in a loving relationship, is embracing the other being, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally, and not ignoring them. That is also a form of love. And those relationships, and unfortunately, maybe some of you have been in relationships like that where you've been ignored. Or maybe you were the ignorer, if that's a word. And it's not a virtue. It's not a good thing. It's not a good trait, right? Another way of saying the same thing is who I see in you, right? Who I see in you. I accept who I see in you, who I see as you, and who I see in me is another way of saying self-love, right? Who I see in me, I accept. And again, embracing, not ignoring, the good, bad, and the ugly, who I see in me, everything. It means everything. I accept everything I see in you, and who I see in me, I accept. That's really another way of expressing the way I'm thinking about love. And it's to be taken seriously when you say those words, right? It's not a superficial feeling. It's not just some superficial phrase that you throw around. I love you. It's not to be taken lightly or cavalierly, right? And it's not a fix-all phrase. Fix it all. Fix it all phrase. You know what that means? That means it's like, well, we just had this argument, we blow up, but I love you. I love you. And like as if that just kind of whitewashes over everything that just happened 5 minutes or 5 hours before. No, you got to work the stuff out, folks. You know, just using I love you as a, you know what whitewash means? It's, you take a paintbrush with this, bunch of white paint, and you just paint over it like, oh, that never happened. I love you. I love you. It's like whitewashing. It's like painting over with big, thick white paint over it. No, no, there was nothing on the wall. We didn't have that argument. No, I love you. You know I love you. Not good enough, folks. Beware of what I call the mother or grandmother syndrome. You know what that is? I was not raised this way, but I have seen it. I have observed it in friends with their loved ones, in their families. I've seen it in this lifetime, not just my other lifetimes. Fortunately, my mother, my grandparents, they didn't exhibit this bad behavior anyway. Um, the mother syndrome, grandmother syndrome. It's like just tell your husband you love him. Just tell your kids you love them. Just say I love you. Or sometimes the mother will say it to the children. I love you. I love you. Say I love me. Say you love me. Really? That's like, isn't that manipulative? Isn't that like superficial? It's like just because you say those words, it doesn't mean, what does that teach the children? It teaches the children to be superficial about this notion of love. It's terrible parenting. I've seen it. I've heard it. I do not encourage it. All right? They're not words to hide behind. These words, I love you, conveys a very deep meaning. It conveys a desire for deep trust and respect. Okay? Read that last phrase to yourself, the last bullet point on the bottom, the last sentence. Don't you think that makes sense? Does that make sense? I want to hear people talk about that in the Q&A. All right? We're almost done with my section of this discussion. I want to open it up in a minute. Right? Saying I love you. doesn't that using those words, doesn't that imply and convey a certain type of relationship that you have with them, that you think you have with them, right? When you say those words, there's a certain assumption that comes along with saying I love you. I would think so, right? Love is an inner light. Yeah. Yeah. We could say that love is an emotion, right? We could say that love is an emotion that comes from a recognition of beauty in our external world. We could say that. You see something that's beautiful, whether it's a person or a beautiful tree. I'm just seeing trees out here. But, it doesn't matter what external. You could, oh, I recognize beauty in that, whatever external to me. Could be an experience, but it's external. I see this beautiful being, this person. And you could say that love is an emotion that comes from recognition of beauty in that. But I think that definition of love, while accurate, is also incomplete. I would say that love comes from within. It starts from within. Yes, it may be evoked, the emotion, the feeling may be evoked, stimulated by that external sight of something that's beautiful. But we don't really get that feeling, do we, unless we're inwardly connected and loving within ourselves. The more it's not a black and white thing either. It's a matter of degree. The more connected we are within ourselves, I would say, the more powerful that experience of love, perception of beauty in that which we see outside of ourselves. So I would say that love is internally generated. It's an energy that's internally generated, not merely fostered by external symbols, right? It's an inner light, I would say. And as I say in the bottom point there, the last point here on the slide, it's more powerful when it's married up with the power of intention and deep understanding, which is what we spent all of today talking about, is understanding love in this different way, in this more nuanced way. Hey, I hope that's helpful. So let's just open up to Q&A now. I'm going to stop sharing slides. And questions, comments, anything. Go ahead. Anybody have any questions, comments? Unmute yourself. Feel free. Kim, did you have something to say? I see you're unmuted. No comments, no questions, no nothing? Susan?
I don't really have any questions.
Hmm.
We heard everything.
Any comments? Did anything resonate with people? This is not just, when I say Q&A, this is called discussion, folks. Okay. Well, I don't have a question. That's not the point. The point is this is a discussion group. That's what forum means. Okay. So any comments? Did anything resonate of what I said?
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I have an aunt when I'm with her on the phone. At the end, she always say, "I love you," and she expect that I say it back, and I say it back, but in a way, I don't really mean it because, like you said, she expect me to say it, and that's not okay.
Yeah, it's exactly my point. It's like people use it in this very superficial way. And I don't know the person you're talking about, of course, but it can also be used in a manipulative way.
Yes.
Like, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, it doesn't. It sounds like that because it doesn't sound that it's with love.
It doesn't sound like it's what, Petrushka?
That it's really love.
Really
It
love.
sounds.
Yeah.
Just use it like a goodbye or something.
Right. Right. And it's okay to use it as a goodbye if you mean it.
Yeah.
You know, there's nothing wrong with saying it. So I want to make people sure people understand what I'm saying here. But it's it shouldn't be used lightly. It should be used meaningfully, is what I'm saying. Because it's powerful. It can be powerful. Now, some people just use it. People, that's their choice. These are suggestions that I'm making to people to improve the quality of our life and our happiness. So these are all suggestions, obviously. But yeah, I've been in situations where people have used it as a manipulation tool in retrospect, but not realizing it while it was happening. Because I view the phrase "I love you" in the way that I've described it to you today. That's how I view it. Again, not everybody does, as Petrushka's example illustrates, right? And I've been in situations where I've realized after the fact that that's not how somebody else was using it. They were using it more as kind of a defense, in a sense, in a weird way. And that may sound strange, but that's what was elucidated to me later. Well, I'm saying this to you to share this with you because if you're ever in a situation like that, you may need to inquire, depending on what your relationship is. If it's just some more distant relationship, that's no big deal. But it's important to know what people mean when they're saying what they're saying, I guess is what I'm saying. Right? Yeah. Susan, go ahead.
Okay, well, keep the conversation going. I'll make some comments. So on the one hand, I agree with you in the sense that I think there's something like word inflation. Like when people say, I literally am burning up at this moment, they really don't mean they're literally burning up. So I love you has also fallen prey to that problem where people just throw it around. However, at the same time, I have a more expansive view of it than I think you described. Due to various psychological and spiritual activities I've engaged in the last few years, I think my sense of love has really grown. And I actually feel love toward lots of people. And so I do say I love you more commonly than I would have 5 years ago. If I ever feel that sort of expansive, swelling experience of my heart, I'll say I love you to the person. And it doesn't have to be, my husband or somebody that I'm, deeply connected to in my actual life. I'm not going to just walk around down the block saying, I love you to everyone. But, I have found myself feeling love toward more people more often due to, I guess, let's say some kind of cultivation of that experience inside myself.
Yeah. So what I agree with everything you just said. So what did you find that I just said in for the last 20 minutes or whatever it was that was not consistent with that?
I guess it felt like you were, being more precious about it, like, only use it if you really mean it and if it's, really deep and abiding. And
Oh,
I
that
mean,
part
of
of
course,
it.
if you mean it, not like to just throw it around superficially.
Well, you said that. You said
Say
that
what?
that you don't just throw it around superficially, that you don't just
Mm.
walk around saying to everybody, I love you, I love you, I love you. So everything you said was consistent, I thought.
Oh, okay, great. Then,
Isn't that what you just said?
yeah, I was gonna say as a joke, I love you, but no,
Yeah, you said
yes,
you don't walk around just saying I love you, I
right,
love you, I love you,
right.
everybody. You don't do
But
that.
I did with my kids, like, when they were little and I would get angry at them and I would feel like, oh, I don't want to be angry, but I can't stop myself. I would sometimes say to them, well, I'm angry, but I still love you, because it was true. you know, I knew that I still loved them and I couldn't stop myself from yelling or whatever. So
Yeah,
I don't wouldn't call that the grandmother syndrome. And
that's
yes, I
not the same thing.
acknowledge that we're not disagreeing.
Yeah, and that last example is not it's not I'm not disagreeing with what the last thing example you gave either. It's a good example. So because I'm that the situations that I'm thinking of were not like what you just described. They're more
Gratuitous.
calculated. They're more calculated. Um, so and there's a heartfelt what you're kind of describing, and you can adjust what I'm saying, but if you think I'm off, but it's like there's a genuine heartfelt feeling that you're describing, that you're expressing in those words, right? And what I'm talking about is people who claim to be heartfelt, but when you push them and say, how come you said that in that situation? You find out that there was another agenda going on. That is and it exists out there. I'm telling you, it exists.
I admit I had an experience like that when I was in high school. I had a boyfriend, and I remember there was one day where he was like really getting on my nerves, and I just wanted to sort of like, all right, already, you know, I said, oh, I love you, you know, just as a way of appeasing him.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
that,
That's an example. That's a very good example of what I was trying to illustrate, maybe inarticulately. That's a great specific example. Yeah. Using it,
yeah,
the phrase I used is as a defense mechanism. So that's kind of the way you were using it. And I understand, and we're not here to beat up your teenage self about that. But
I hope I've evolved a little bit since
exactly,
then.
exactly. But I know adults who do that, right? And so that is not healthy, let's just say. It's not healthy because
Okay.
the recipient of that may be assuming that you actually do love them.
Yeah. I mean, I actually kind of did, but I was
Well,
getting it.
not you, but this other,
Yeah.
in that you're not trying to push them away. That's up. But yeah, so that's a great example. That's a great
Yeah.
example. Yeah.
So my conclusion is that we do agree.
Yeah. No, we're agreeing, and everything you said, I agree with. That it's kind of you're just describing a more you're describing basically my talk today had two sections. It was the first section was more global, and the the second section was more specific to romantic situations. But you're right, there could be kind of an in between. I wasn't talking about general feeling of love. That was kind of more the first section of what I talked about today, right? The acceptance and the feeling and so forth and so on. I did the second section because that's where I've seen people go awry. That's where I've seen people slip and get very sloppy in their usage of the phrase "I love you" or their view of how they love and how they express love to others. That's why I went there. But it's not black and white. But I agree with what you said. Yeah, Gyro. Hey.
Hey, I love you, Kelvin and Natalie and everyone. And I love my enemies and strangers. Well, but I have to work on how to love myself. No, but I was wondering, and was it Natalie that was talking about that she through some kind of spiritual uh, uh, effort, she was able to, I don't know if increase the love or
I
have
think that was
more,
me.
or Susan, you're saying you were able to, what was it that you did to maybe love
Just
more
feel more
people,
expansively
more expensive?
loving toward more people.
And how is that done?
Well, I mean, I think honestly, the key is accepting and loving yourself.
Mm,
The more you know yourself, accept who you are, who you were meant to be, like from birth, and love that, the more you just automatically feel love toward other people. Because a lot
mm,
of our holding back and closed-heartedness is because we're disliking ourselves or judging ourselves.
mm.
I'm not the teacher here, but that's what I think.
Yeah, we're all
That's my
teachers.
experience.
We are all teachers of everybody. And the thing is, and whether you realize it or not, you are teaching other people in your behavior and your actions. And but yeah, no, that's great. And I agree with what Susan said. I mean, Jaro, my simple answer to your question would be that my meditating all these decades has opened me up, and I've cleaned out enough of my junk, and I'm not perfect and I still got lots of junk to get rid of, but it's cleaned out enough so that what Susan is describing is my normal state internally. And then, as Susan says, I agree with her, that's the foundation, that internally within ourselves, right? Cleaning house to to whatever degree we can. That expression of that externally, and in terms of love and acceptance, acceptance is the key element there. And then for me, a huge shift, and I don't know if it was 20 or 30, 35 years ago, whatever, 20 to 30 years ago, some shift happened in me where I stopped trying to change other people. Stopped trying to change other people. And and even on a subtle level, you know, and it's still a little bit there, but it's a lot less than it was 20, 30 years ago, man. I'm telling you, 40 years ago. And
I
that's
just realized that
huge.
what I said about ourselves is the same thing that you said about other people, like accepting, not trying to change,
Exactly.
loving. And if you can apply that to your own self, that it's a way of loving yourself.
Well, that's what there's a slide on that from today. We talked about that, self-love. And so that's the fundamental, and that's the tough one for most people, but it really, to gyro to your question, that's really square one. That's really square one, because as Susan's implying, you don't deal with your own internal stuff. You project that out to the world. You see it because it's your filter. It's through your filter, through those are the eyeglasses that you're looking at the world through, is your own internal stuff. And you see that in other people. And if your glasses are real cloudy, that's what you're going to see. Real cloudy people, cloudy relationships. And you're going to be projecting that, the frustration, the anger, the sadness, the guilt, the whatever it is from inside yourself into your external relationships. And that's going to cloud this notion of acceptance, love and acceptance in the way that we're talking about today. Right. So, yeah, to me, I mean, I don't know, this started happening to me. I remember walking out of my parents' house once when I was in my 20s. Maybe I'd been meditating for 5, 6, 7, 8 years or something like this. So this was 45, 50 years ago now. And I remember walking out, and it was late afternoon or early evening. I was home for a weekend or something. And I remember it was a summer evening, and there was nobody around in the neighborhood for whatever reason at that moment. I walked out of my driveway. It was around 10 o'clock at night. And I just had this really powerful feeling of love and acceptance, is the only way I can describe it, for everything in the universe. I had this very powerful experience. I'd been meditating for 5, 6, 7 years. Some I can't remember exactly. It happened in the 1970s sometime. And I just had this very powerful, I remember thinking in my mind, this thought came up, I feel like I said to myself, this thought, when it came up in my mind, I thought, well, I just love everything. I love everything. It was just this, and you're talking about a science guy, right? So was very uncharacteristic of my personality. I'm not this woo-woo kind of walk around like Susan was saying that she does not do, saying I love you, I love you, I love you to people you don't know, you know?
I think that's the same kind of thing that I've have felt awakened in myself.
Yeah.
Not as expansive as you're describing, but some part of that.
Yeah. And we don't need to compare, but yeah, exactly. It's a very sublime, powerful feeling. And all of this, including the specifics in terms of the romantic parts that we were talking about in the second section of our talk today, are in this spectrum of what we're talking about love, right? And how it gets expressed through us as individuals is really important. It's what makes or breaks relationships, isn't it? Really, seriously. All right. And all I'm saying is that when we are in a relationship with somebody, we need to be cognizant, we need to be consciously aware of how we're expressing this. And I don't just mean words. I mean, obviously, we're talking words and so forth and saying, I love you and so forth. But it's behavior too. It's how you look at somebody, right? It's how you communicate non-verbally, not just verbally, is what I'm saying. And by communicating in a love language that's nonverbal, that you don't really mean to the other person, you could be hurting that person, right? I've seen this happen before. So where people think that they're being a loving person by expressing non-verbally that they love the other person, whereas the other person is receiving that as they love me personally, individually. And that's not what's being meant to be conveyed by the conveyor. Did I lose you there? Does it make sense? Anybody confused about what I just said?
No.
It's very important. I've seen it much more so with women towards men. We're talking hetero relationships, than the other way around. It's something that I think my women friends need to be more cognizant of. Guys tend to be so clueless in terms of their emotions, but and not expressive. Non-expressive maybe is the better word than clueless. Non-expressive emotionally, and women tend to be more emotionally expressive. And women, I think, again, this is a guy, I don't want to go into mansplaining here, with that phrase, but just a heads up, we guys, sometimes you may think that we are clueless. How could he interpret that, what I said to him or how I looked at him in that way? And you're right. Sometimes we are clueless men in terms of receiving those nonverbals and even the verbals. But it's something that's to be cognizant of in our communication with others. Other comments? Anything else? Anything else? Well, I hope this has been helpful. Ideas that we shared today. Hope it's been helpful for folks. And again, you've heard me say this before, but I repeat it to you. You take what's useful and you discard the rest. You put the rest on the shelf and you let it sit there. Maybe you don't even use it. But if anything's been helpful, then that's my goal. is to help increase people's level of contentment and inner peace in life. That's how I think of happiness, and reduce our stress, reduce our suffering in life, improve communications amongst us as human beings in our world community. Okay, great to see everybody. Thanks for the folks. I see folks from the UK and the Netherlands and the US, across the US here. So thanks for everybody joining.
Thank you.
You. Take care.
Bye.
You're very welcome. See you.